Continues. Chief Executive Carrie Lam was forced to suspend her annual address after being heckled in the city's legislature. Lam later held a news conference condemning the U.S. legislature for quote-unquote meddling in the affairs of Hong Kong. In a news conference, Lam rejected two of the protesters' 5 demands. She said that the city's status as a financial hub has not been shaken despite more than 4 months of anti-government protest. After 4 months of unrest, Carrie Lam's government and leadership was also being questioned. Listen in to what she had to say.
Of course, I understand that as a result of these 4 months social unrest, many people are very unhappy with the situation and even with the government, because we could not promise them when things will go back to normal. And for some of those, we could not promise them the things that they want us to do. But that doesn't mean that we have no will to continue to govern. The will and the determination to govern is still there. That's why, despite the pressure and the time constraint in the last few months, my colleagues have put together a very substantive policy address and a policy address supplement with over 220 initiatives. And we will put our mind together to implement all these initiatives.
Opposition lawmakers disrupted the session from the start by shouting slogans. Pro-democracy lawmakers shouted 5 demands, not one less. After a first interruption, the session briefly resumed only to be interrupted again. It was then adjourned for a second time, with the address delivered by pre-recorded video instead. Lam said that the government will continue to uphold one country, two systems formula. She also said that the government will not tolerate calls for independence or anything that hurts China's national security or sovereignty. The legislature resumed its sitting on Wednesday for the first time since it was stormed by protesters in July this year. The Legislative Council was expected to officially withdraw the extradition bill that sparked the protest in the first place. The withdrawal will only be possible once the session resumes. Meanwhile, Lam faces immense pressure to regain trust and resolve the city's biggest political crisis in decades. Meanwhile, in a clear rebuke to China, the lower chamber of U.S. legislature has reaffirmed its support for pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong. It passed a series of bills that aim to defend civil rights in the semi-autonomous territory. The 4 pieces of legislation take a hard line on China. The Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act would require the U.S. Foreign Minister to certify each year that Hong Kong retains its autonomy to receive special treatment as a major financial center. It would bar commercial exports of military and crowd control items that Hong Kong could use against demonstrators.
In Congress, Democrats and Republicans in the House and in the Senate stand united with the people of Hong Kong. If America does not speak out for human rights in China because of commercial interest, then we lose all moral authority to speak out for human rights any place in the world.
The move has prompted an angry response from China. China's foreign ministry said that Beijing will take quote-unquote effective countermeasures against the new laws passed by the U.S. In a statement, China warned the U.S. to stop meddling in its affairs. The Chinese Foreign Ministry's statement reads, and I quote, "What Hong Kong faces is not the so-called human rights and democracy issue at all, but the issue of stopping violence, reinstating order, and upholding the rule of law as soon as possible," unquote.
再次强调，对于美方的错误决定，对于美方损害中方利益的错误行为，我们会采取有力的措施予以反制，坚决维护自身的主权、安全和发展利益。至于具体举措，请你保持关注。
The law, if enacted, would end the Hong Kong-US special trading status, unless the Foreign Ministry certifies annually that the city authorities are respecting human rights and rule of law. 4 months of large and often violent pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong pose the biggest popular challenge to Chinese President Xi Jinping since he came to power in 2012. The protest started in opposition to an extradition bill that would have allowed Hong Kong residents to be sent for trial in Communist Party-controlled mainland Chinese courts. The protests have now morphed into a broader pro-democracy movement. China has accused some foreign governments, including the UK and the US, of fanning anti-China sentiments over. And joining me for more on this developing story is my colleague Grace Lee, who is joining us live from Hong Kong. Grace, good evening to you. Walk us through those 5 demands in the first place, and which demands has Carrie Lam at least spoken about accepting going forward?
Well, according to Carrie Lam today, she is not going to appease to the protesters anymore. She will not give in to any more of their 5 demands. She spoke a little bit about this during her press conference after her policy address, saying that she especially will not give in to the demand that protesters who have been arrested be given a clean slate. And that's, of course, one of the key demands that protesters have wanted, along with universal suffrage, which is another issue that keeps being raised here in Hong Kong. And yet, Carrie Lam, its leader, refuses to talk about it on a day like this, a very important policy address with no real mention of it at all. Now, that has invoked a lot of negative attention towards Carrie Lam. She's already struggling. Her poll results show that she's at 22.3% for popularity, which makes her the least popular leader Hong Kong has ever seen since the handover. And of course, today's results will only make that even worse for her. But of course, moving forward, pro-democracy and pro-Beijing camps have both stood up today to say that the policy address didn't really achieve anything, and it doesn't really have any concrete steps to return Hong Kong back to normal, because she mainly spoke about things like housing and social welfare, which are symptoms, but really not addressing any of the key issues that Hong Kong is seeing right now.
And also, very quickly, Grace, the lower chamber of US legislature has passed a series of bills that will entail annual certification of that Hong Kong will respect rule of law and democracy. How is that playing out in Hong Kong as we speak? Are the protesters, are the demands being met by the US lawmakers, and how is that playing out within the Hong Kong establishment, so to speak?
Of course, Hong Kong protesters are welcoming that result, and in just a few more steps, that may actually pass through U.S. President Donald Trump to become law, and we have yet to see that. But of course, for protesters, at least here, they say it's a step forward. They say it's a sign that they have the backing of the international community. Of course, over the past couple of months, we saw protesters waving the U.S. flag, trying to get some attention from the likes of U.S. President Donald Trump to help them in their fight against their own government, police, and of course, Beijing, which is backing those powers. So, it makes them feel like they at least have some pull now, but we have yet to see if that will pass. But of course, protesters here are very hopeful.
All right, thank you, Grace. That was Wion Grace Lee reporting live from Hong Kong.